Let's go to her panel now. In Colombo, I'm joined by Roel Raymond. She's an associate editor at Raw Media, an online platform covering issues across South Asia. And in Mumbai is Sutharshan Sukumaran. He's a contributor at the news site Tamil Guardian. I thank you both for joining us here on the Newsmakers. Roel, the Easter terror attack, has that unleashed a sort of hatred in Sri Lanka that's going to be very hard to put back in the box?
I think you'd have to tell me hatred at whom before I can answer that question. I would say it seems apparent after the riots that occurred in the western and northwestern provinces that, yes, a certain segment of the population, a small extremist segment, seems to have reacted in hate towards the Muslim community. But does it mean that everybody feels any kind of hate towards the Muslim community? I don't think so, no.
Did predate, Roel, the terror attack? Or was it something that's only a reaction to the terror attack, in your opinion?
No, in my opinion, the tensions between the Sinhalese, some parts of the Sinhalese and the Muslim community have been simmering for a long time. There were riots last year during which one man died. This year, another man died. And it is my opinion that unless these issues, the issues at the heart of it, are dealt with, this will continue to crop up. And I don't see these issues being dealt with.
Sutharshan, the issues are not being dealt with, according to Roel. Do you agree?
I'd probably say I agree. And it has been something that came from before the Easter attack. So, for example, like the UN Special Rapporteur on counter-terrorism, after visiting Sri Lanka, released a report last year where he said actually the existing counter-terrorism legislation in Sri Lanka marginalizes whole ethnic communities. And he pointed out communities like the Tamil community and the Muslim community have already been suffering under counter-terror laws in Sri Lanka, which have allowed for things like arbitrary detention, ongoing torture, where several rights organizations have said there's been ongoing torture up until 2017, 2018. So there's always been this climate of kind of ethnic disenfranchisement in Sri Lanka. But these Easter attacks have now kind of flared it up. And even with the government response after the attacks, we saw the ban on face veils. And then just yesterday, the Prime Minister announced that actually Islamic schools are now going to be put under the Education Ministry and monitored by the Education Ministry. And then on top of that, today we saw the President of Sri Lanka give a presidential pardon to someone who's actually in prison, who's the head of the BBS, which is an extremist, almost militant Buddhist group. And he's given the leader of that a presidential pardon to, again, now walk free. So there is this already, in terms of the actions of the government and legislation, there has been this climate of kind of ethnic disenfranchisement. And right now, the Muslim community are really seeing the brunt of it.
Right.
After the attacks.
So, Roel, with that in mind, especially with the pardoning of someone from Bodu Balasena, is the message to Sri Lankan Muslims that the authorities won't protect you?
I think the message is that they will take what the Bodu Balasena leader, Venerable Nana Sarathera, said seriously. He has been very vocal, definitely a very extremist, militant leader, not welcomed among more of the liberal Colombo liberal people and journalists, more progressive people. But his views are very extremist, and he has been right from the start very much against the Muslims. And I feel that in this pardoning that was just announced a little while ago, that the president is sending a very clear message that he is siding with what the Venerable Nana Sarathera is saying about the Muslims, and that the threat, because Nana Sarathera had talked about extremism in Sri Lanka, he had talked about Kathankudi in the eastern province being being influenced by Arabian influencers, and he had in fact said very clearly there was one video in which he said very clearly, if you all don't believe me, you all will see this happen the day that there's a terror attack on Sri Lanka. You will believe me. So I think in light of all of these things, it seems that the president is now siding with with this Buddhist priest, even though he's very extremist. and it seems like he's going to listen to what he says.
Okay, let's have a little listen to what the president had to say with regards to fighting against terrorism. Have a little listen.
I am very confident that our war heroes and intelligence agencies have the capability and the strength to wipe out this international terrorism from our country. In the last month, we have either arrested or killed all those who engaged in terrorist acts. That has created a situation where we can have confidence in having permanent stability.
So, Sutharshan, I mean, in a vacuum, I don't think anybody can really disagree with what the president's saying there, right? Okay, there's been a terror attack, and we want to root out terror, and we want to stop terror. We don't want 250 people to be butchered and massacred as they were on Easter Sunday. But what about the approach, Sutharshan, do you have a problem with?
So there's several things. So first of all, as even the UN says, the legislation for counter-terror is wholly dangerous and has been used for decades now to just disenfranchise ethnic communities that aren't from the majority. So there's already so many reports of arbitrary detention, so many reports of torture at the hands of the state. So with this this ongoing narrative of another war against terror, it allows the state again to act in these ways against ethnic communities. But fundamentally, Sri Lanka, Sirisena and Ranil came in 2015 fundamentally to reform the country towards a more liberal and maybe more secular state. But what's happened is repeatedly they failed to be able to do that. And that's because they haven't been able to mobilize the majoritarian community to accept the secular nature of Sri Lanka. And this is the thing, even when they came into power in 2015, the singular vote base, the majority in terms of numbers, voted for Rajapaksa, which is the more ultra-nationalist the party. And even when they campaigned in elections, when the liberal, maybe Ranil's party campaigned in elections, he actually didn't talk about secularism. He kind of pandered towards the nationalist rhetoric to try and get the votes. And yet he still didn't manage to get the majority votes in elections. And Sri Lanka is going into elections again. It's going into this cycle of pandering to that.
And that's an interesting point, because I want to quote something from foreign policy, and I'll get your response first, Roel. Let's have a little read through this. The prospect of the former president's brother, Gotabaya Rajapaksa, winning a presidential victory is looking increasingly likely. He declared his candidacy on April 26, 5 days after the bombings. If he were to become president, a vote is expected later this year that would augur the recommencement of the Rajapaksa agenda. Increased nepotism and heightened authoritarianism would almost certainly follow. Human rights activists, the media, and broader elements of civil society would face greater scrutiny. The situation for numerical minorities, especially Tamils and Muslims, would be dire. That's from Taylor Dibbett. Do you agree with that, Roel?
Yes, I do. I can't say that any of us in the media fraternity are excited about the prospect of any of the Rajapaksas coming back into power. A lot of us worked, worked towards let's put it this way: in our industry itself, we were hampered. Many of our editors, people I worked with personally, were harassed, had to leave the country. People I know were killed. So, I mean, this is all common knowledge. I can't say that I'm looking forward to it personally, but I do know that many people who weren't for the Rajapaksas, who actively voted against the Rajapaksas in 2015, given the current climate, given the fact that they're now fearful, given the fact that they're now thinking in terms of national security, suddenly Gotabaya Rajapaksa and the Rajapaksa seem to be very suddenly seem to be an acceptable proposition to many people. I was surprised by the change in opinion, because they do feel that the Rajapaksas would be able to fight back in terms of military, in a military context against terrorism.
Well, close advisor and spokesman for Gotabaya Rajapaksa, Melinda Rajapaksa, was booked for this very program. Unfortunately, he pulled out at the last moment. Sutharshan, because you were appearing on the program. He refused to appear on the program because you were sharing a panel with him. And then we said, well, we'll do a one-on-one with you without Sutharshan, but because you were given a platform at all, he refused to be a part of the program. Tell me why, and how do you feel about that?
That's very interesting. I think it's purely because Sri Lanka has struggled with the secular nature of the state and the people. So up until, and it all started in 1970. So in 1970, Sri Lanka's name changed from Ceylon to Sri Lanka, and the constitution changed into a unitary state where Sinhala Buddhism was given the first and foremost place in the constitution, and Sinhalese was made the foremost language. And this is actually what really triggered the tensions, because you'd had 30 years of political struggle just for kind of secular devolution of powers. Then you had this new rebranding of Sri Lanka, which went completely the other way, and it plunged Sri Lanka into even more turmoil and more anti-kind of minority violence than it already had. And this has been the issue. So now, whenever people speak about secularism and challenge the nature of the actual state of Sri Lanka, it's seen as problematic. And this is the thing, even when you have a Liberal Party coming in elections, they're confined to this thing of where essentially Sri Lanka turns into either an authoritarian state or an ethnocracy. It's never had the chance to go past an ethnocracy into a secular democracy. And this is where a lot of the minority communities will actually even blame the Liberal parties, because when Liberal parties go up for elections, they don't sell the idea of a secular state, actually. They don't speak about the minority issues, the issues of disenfranchisement, and instead they just talk about maybe ending corruption and loosening media freedom. But even in media freedom, when you look at the 39 journalists that were killed during the period of Rajapaksa, the majority of the 80% of them were Tamil. When you look at the way the military is deployed in the country, a military of 200,000, which is double the size of the UK, 80% of that military is deployed in Tamil regions in the north and east. So clearly there's a structural issue in Sri Lanka which leads to cyclical violence, which cannot be resolved from within. It has to have this international mediation, which Sri Lanka has always been resistant to.
Right.
And this is one of the fundamental reasons why the Sri Lanka has rejected UN Human Rights Council, rejects half of the Tamil diaspora, half of the Tamil community has left the island, has now lived outside for a generation for reasons like these, actually.
Okay. Roel, it's the 10th anniversary of the end of the civil war. Amnesty International saying on the 10th anniversary of the end of Sri Lanka's 3-decade-long internal armed conflict, Amnesty calls on the government of Sri Lanka to end impunity and put accountability for crimes under international law and human rights violations and abuses at the heart of its transitional justice process. And I wonder, can introspection, accountability and justice when it comes to the past and the civil war with the Tamil Tigers help inform a policy with the current trouble that we're seeing on the streets today?
I mean, that would be the ideal, if we can actually, if each of our communities can be introspective and actually deal with the issues without it having to, I mean, I don't even have to talk on it, because it's obvious we haven't done that, and that is why we are at this point. That is why we got into the ethnic war with in the first place. So that is the ideal. It would be great if we had the kind of leaders who were interested in resolving these issues, interested in making the minorities and the majority live together to coexist. It would be great if that was the case, but I don't see it happening. But I also think the likelihood of international intervention is also very, very slim. So unfortunately, it seems like we're just stuck in this cyclic trend of violence recurring every so often. And that's really sad, because it would, I mean, I feel simple things could be put into place just to ensure that the majority is held in place and they don't act out of certain bounds, and the minority is made to feel safe. It's just small things that could be tweaked to make things better for everybody here, and it's not being done. Yeah.
Okay. Roel Raymond and Sutharshan Sukumaran, it's been a pleasure having you both on the Newsmakers. Thank you very much for joining us.